It will be mainly devoted to different international initiatives, but before that we will still have some time for more questions if you have on the presentations from yesterday and on the tool presented by IMF for conversion of SUTs into IOTs. I pass now the floor to Gerard, I think the chair of the meeting today.
Okay, thank you very much, Tihomira, and welcome back everybody to this third and final day of the special session on supply and use tables and input-output tables. So far, we had two very interesting but also intensive 2 days where we looked at country practices, more theoretical aspects of supply and use tables, and of course, we demonstrated two tools who can be used in balancing supply and use tables and deriving input-output tables. I will be chairing today, so Sanjeev did that yesterday. Many thanks for that, Sanjeev. I had another engagement, so he could luckily step in. Today we will start, like Tihomira said, we will start with the follow-up of the Q&A concerning the presentations of session 2. So we have still some time in the agenda. If you have questions on the input-output converter or the main functionalities of the tool, if you have specific technical issues, for example, you can't install the tool or etc., then you can address your questions by mail. Today it's we should focus on the questions on the main features. If you like to take the floor, if you have a question, if you would like to intervene, please raise your hand or put your question in the chat. In the chat, you can also write your question or remark in Russian. It will be translated, Dan. I'd like to remind you that when you take the floor, when you intervene, please, turn off the interpretation if you take the floor. Otherwise, the system will not work properly and the interpreters will get confused. Finally, before I give the floor to Sanjeev to moderate this part of the special session, I'd like to remind you that at the end of today, we will have a session on which we draw some conclusions. And one of the questions on the last slide will be that we are also inviting you to propose topics for next year's special session. So, keep that in mind during the 2.5 hours we have now before us. And in the end, the question will come back. And, if you already have ideas for topics for next year's seminar, you can then raise them. With that, we start the third day, and I pass on the floor to Sanjeev.
Thanks, Gerard. Good day, everybody. Hopefully you've had a nice rest, and many of you may well have even delved into loading the tool, trying it out, testing it out. I have nothing in the chat, but please use this opportunity. I see a number of attendees who have, for example, used automated type tools for filling in, say, between two benchmark years, or tools that have taken from supply and use tables to input-output tables, missing tables, etc. So what I'd be encouraging people here is to say, look, you've seen the tool yesterday. Are there, from both Greg and co, if there's any questions you have on the tools or any improvements, or you've tried it and it doesn't work, but not so much the logistics, but maybe the methodology, please, by all means, ask, because I'm sure Greg and Achille will be able to help with the answers. If other people who've used tools think that there are issues that people need to make sure they reflect in their work, please, by all means, raise your hand, share the information. It's one of the important things about this type of session is we're sharing information and learning from each other. We want to know what the best practice is or good practice. And if that's shareable, then that's even better. So I'm going to pause for a moment, because obviously you definitely don't want me talking for the next 20 minutes. I'd definitely want some of the attendees to come in. So don't be shy. This and often I say to people, you may ask a simple question, but the answer is very important, not just for the person who's asking the question, but also for the other attendees. So if it's a difficult question or a simple question, please do. Obviously, my lack of chocolates to be shared out to the first person who asks a question technique online doesn't quite work in the same way as being in a physical office. Who of you are going to be good enough to ask the first question? I'm tempted to look down the list. And I won't do this. I was going to nominate 1 or 2 people if they want to sort of contribute to the role of automated tools, automated balancing. You all must be doing some form of balancing, manual and or automated in your offices. Are there things that you would like to improve? Are there things that really irritate you? Are there things that you think that should be addressed? And how do other countries address them? So eventually, I knew I'd get someone. So come in, Bo. Well done. And if I was there and we were in Geneva, you would have the first box of chocolates.
Thanks a lot.
Just imagine you're receiving a virtual box of chocolates. So Bo, go ahead.
Well, actually, now that you provoke a question, I would like to go back to your slides from yesterday, or was it the day before, where you at some point said that leaving a residual or not balancing would be contrary to the purpose of the supply use tables.
Okay.
Is that?
Can you elaborate what you're asking? I understand the issue.
Right.
Go ahead.
And I was wondering, is that really true? I mean,
Okay.
doesn't the leaving a residual really show the uncertainty of your supply use table, basically, showing what problems you have, and just balancing it automatically will not really help anything. It just ensures the balance. So I really see more the residual as a signal. Here is something you need to do something about. And if you cannot do it, if you cannot identify the cause or give a best estimate, then an automatic balancing actually doesn't, in my mind, make much sense.
I think the way you've articulated that is very good. I'm not sure I can believe I actually said personally that a residual is acceptable in supply and use tables. I think it might have come out of the automated tool discussion, possibly, but may need to check. However, I agree with you. Having a residual in the supply and use tables defeats the object of the exercise. Which industry and product do we call a residual? Makes no sense. So where I would come from is, you're going to have product imbalances, for example. You must have a degree of manual balancing, investigative balancing, to get those imbalances down. But if you get to a point they're still significant and they're not small enough for automated, you have to continue to investigate. If you have a strategy that puts such items before the automated balancing into some sort of residual column or row, I think that's wrong. It defeats the object of the exercise. So it's really important to get the manual balance, the imbalances down to a small level to leave for the automated. We can't have a residual. Now, I know in some countries, items like household final consumption or changes in inventories can become a residual. If that's the case, then they still need to look and evaluate of the economic plausibility of those time series, because the residual may well be doing something very different each year, therefore distorting the underlying time series. Are they plausible? Did Bo really buy 50% more potatoes this year, and then the following year it dropped by 95%? Because that's the outcome of the residual. That makes no sense. That's not plausible. So again, whether you have a balance from an automated tool or the pre-automated balance, you've got to look at economic plausibility. So I'm not a fan of any residual within the supply and use tables network. By definition, everything's balanced. The question is the transparency of how you got that balance. If the argument is that in some area the quality wasn't good enough, then that's the metadata that you would provide with the balance to say, in order to achieve this balance, this is what we've had to do within the parameters of the quality gates that we've set. But if they are beyond those quality gates, I think you should then support that with the metadata. So the user knows there are some areas of weakness in the balance, but it's still a good balance. Does that help rebalance your view? Because I don't think I know quarterly accounts have residuals because they don't have supply and use tables, because they don't have the time, they don't necessarily have all the data, etc., to do what I've described. So therefore, the three approaches to measuring GDP are not balanced, and people will do certain things to get them close enough, and then they review them in the annual benchmark or the 5-yearly benchmark. I don't have a problem having a residual in that type of process, as long as, again, we're transparent, but I don't see any real gain in having a residual in the supply and use tables. Does that help?
Well, at least I don't think we fundamentally disagree, but it's just more a question of transparency of your procedures, I think. Thanks.
Great. I think Jose Rueda Cantucci has come on. So hello, Jose. So any experience with hybrid methods? Yes.
Yes, I just want to suggest IMF, to develop further the tool in a way to give them more work and try to put some, small example on a hybrid method with, depending on the product, you can assume the product technology assumption or the industry technology assumption. I know, and I did some work on this actually with films data. You could run in specific regressions to get a kind of a likelihood ratio of which assumption would be most likely that it would behave better. But leaving that aside, it would be good to allow the user to determine with maybe not the econometrics, but with expert knowledge, which is one or the other. I know the formulas are there in the literature, so maybe it's a good, let's say, further development.
I agree with you, Jose. I think we have model A to D, and we also have the hybrid, and the hybrid is actually useful in many ways. It may well be country specific in the nature of the industries and how they're set up. If the institutional unit is not separable, like the example I provided yesterday, and electricity companies having inputs to produce electricity, have inputs in current expenditure terms to survive, to produce their outputs, etc. And then they have inputs like pylons, which are very different in terms of the input structure for that product. Agriculture industry putting up construction is another example. So there will be different examples where the non-principal product has a very different input structure, but it's not a separable unit. And that is where the hybrid assumption comes into play, because obviously you've got to make, it's almost like an extraneous sort of adjustment that you're making, but you're addressing a particular issue. But yeah, I think it's always probably nice to give the international institutions more work. So hopefully Greg from the IMF or Achille can factor that into both of their models. So that's, Greg, you come on. Do you want to add anything to the response to Jose, the extra work?
Yeah, especially because it's Asher doing the work, so I can convey the message. I think that is it's just like you said, an experimental tool that we have. We are still testing, so I will convey your message to him. I don't think it's too much work actually, so we can investigate and we get back to you. Through Tihomira, maybe for an update for next year.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Greg.
This is Sanjeev. Greg, you can contact me if you wish at any time. If you need to, to speed up the process in any way.
Okay. The offer's there, Greg.
Yeah, thank
Just wanna
you.
Pick up another item in the chat from Natalia, who's asked, is there any IT tool to convert SUTs from purchaser prices into basic prices? Because it sounds like she has the luxury, like many of us, who have to do it manually. Now, this is a very good question. I think I would give more weight to an IT tool converting supply news tables at basic prices to input-output tables, because you've already addressed the negatives, etc., as a precursor. So the role of the automated tool will actually be more useful. However, having an automated tool from supply news tables at purchaser prices to have a matrix to remove taxes on products, etc., separate matrix to remove or reallocate, sorry, the trade and transport margins, and then the third one to remove imports to put them on a separate row. I think that's expecting, my personal view, too much from an automated tool. Because if I take taxes, you're going to have different tax rates on products and different tax rates paid by the producer. So some industries may well be exempt. Some industries can or cannot pass the VAT on to the seller. And within some industries, there may be a few products that are zero rated or standard rated or a mix in terms of a different effective rate. It's not easy to automate that. What you could do is have a matrix of appropriate tax rates, and then that goes into the system as part of the automated process from purchaser price to basic price. The same approach would apply to imports. You can't just come up with an automated tool that comes up with imports. You have to handle, for example, the direct imports and then the indirect imports. You may have a matrix then of proportions to which you can apply control totals and then apply an automated process thereafter. And the same applies to the distribution, trade, and transport margins. The margins rates will vary by industry and or product. And in all three matrices, they will vary from year to year. Remember what I said in current prices, you've got the price impact in there as well, which means they're going to be more volatile than they will be in volume terms. So my steer would be in each of the three items, you need to do preparatory work to produce a matrix. Then you can leave it to the automated tool to go from purchase price to basic price. And then finally, as you probably guess, the human needs to evaluate what those results are. And if they are negative, you can maybe automate that out of the process. But I'm very concerned when people do that, because sometimes small positive numbers may not be feasible or plausible, but because they're positive, they don't fail the check, i.e. they're not negative. So the focus is on negative numbers, but the focus should also be a bit more wider. Some positive numbers may not be plausible. It's a number, but does it make any sense in basic prices? So I would say it would be very difficult to have an IT tool that converts without a lot of manual preparatory input. I just want to come back to Gregory if he's got anything to add on that, because obviously this is much more of an IT tool type point.
Yeah. So I don't think Ashley is online because it's quite early in Washington, but if I may respond on his behalf, that's the functionality is got already in the tool, the allocation of taxes, margins, and subsidies on products to the use in order to have the basic price. So, I mean, he's working on basic assumptions, which you can refine using some additional information that he mentioned yesterday. So, of course, it's just a mathematical solution, and it's not in terms of different tax rates. I don't think you can handle that directly, but maybe indirectly through the structure of the allocation, I think may be possible. But again, I take that as a comment, and we convey to Achille. Of course, any mathematical solution is only offering something, not very, just a first start, I would say, because you may have to review the allocation manually if you have additional information.
Thanks, Greg. I was
Can I
also
add something, Sanjeev? Good morning.
Ah, hi, Kelly.
Oh,
Yes,
you're here, Achille.
good morning.
I didn't see your name, Achille. Sorry, I checked before, but if you're here, you can answer better than me.
No, I think you just gave the right answer, Greg. Sandeep, as I said yesterday, at any time you can change any figure in the system. So basically, the system is just creating a template for the user, and the user can either use the proposed figure or just input his self-computed data. So it's just a template. Thank you. I'll stop there.
No, that's fine. I mean, some people might get the impression in the last couple of days, I definitely want a role for automated tools, but I don't want to get rid of the humans. So I don't see anything else in the chat. Is there anything anyone would like to come in on, even to share their own personal experiences, or if they've developed in-house tools? What are the advantages or disadvantages? Because remember, I know we're all doing balancing to some degree. Or is there someone who genuinely believes that the supply and use table should be balanced manually after the investigative balancing, and there shouldn't really be a need for an automated tool? I am obviously saying that as a little teaser to see if I can get someone to respond to that.
Can I jump in again, Sandeep?
Yes, by all means.
Yes, I think the aim of the tool should be to just reduce the workload that might prevent some national accounts to start some work, such as compiling the IOT or the SUTs. So basically, if the tool should propose a kind of starting point for the compiler, maybe they will be more willing to engage in such work. And that is the aim of the tool we just proposed. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Gregory? You're on mute, I think, Gregory.
Sorry. Yes. So regarding the question, can we manually balance? I don't think we can, unless you use a residual, which is often the solution used by compilers when I ask when we provide technical assistance, and I hear that someone balances the tables manually, and I mean perfectly balancing to the dollar or to the cent. This is just impossible, because you if you think about it, given your constraints, you try to balance a product, so you put out of balance another one or another industry, and goes on and on and on. And it's just a waste of time, because your national accounts are not accurate to the dollar. So if you try to balance the tables to $1, it's just, yeah, you're shocked, Sanjeev, but so basically I worked at the Australian Bureau of Statistics, and we had a threshold. And below that threshold, we say we don't balance manually because it doesn't make sense. But even if you wanted to, I mean, technically, I guess it's possible, but I really don't see the point, because you don't have confidence in your data to that level.
Yeah. I mean, I wasn't advocating pure investigative balancing and manual balancing without any automated balancing, but I wanted to see if I could tease out anyone who'd have any comments if it was only manual balancing. But that's good. Thanks to Kelly and Gregory. But yeah, I think it's very important that there's a role for investigative balancing, manual balancing, and then automated balancing. The balance between the three is very important, and obviously will be driven by the resources available, the quality of the data, the time available. But at the end of the day, the automated part, we don't want that to be doing a significant part. We want that to not really change the structures that much, but in essence, we want that deliberately covering all the small type items, saving, like you say, Gregory, a lot of human time, because the humans, if that can be done by a machine, what the human would do within a certain tolerance, then why not use this machine? And that is very important, that balance. Right. I don't
Sanjeev, may I comment on that and ask an additional question?
Go ahead.
Okay.
You are the chair. It's your program.
Well. I think well, you're correct that manual balancing is not always the most efficient way to go forward. It of course depends on the number of industries and commodities you have in your supply and use table, whether or not manual balancing is even possible. But my question would be, and again, can imagine that the audience also has that question, are there any rules of thumb about what are the larger differences you have to solve manually before you can start the procedure? Or put it the other way, if you do not, well, what's the threshold if you do not solve the bigger discrepancies so the machine won't run? Can you say something about Craig or Achille?
I think I'll hand over to Greg and Achille in a moment. That's a good question, Gerard. I think you've got to do the investigative balancing, you've got to do the manual balancing. And then I think what you do is you also have to have a monetary and a percentage threshold. So for example, if the supply and use imbalance on the product is, let's say, for argument's sake, 1% of the total supply, 5% of the total supply, 50% of the total supply, and within a monetary equivalent, what you've got to say is all the manual balancing has got to get them all down below whatever that threshold is, which would then allow the automated tool to do what I call like a little shuffle. And it doesn't distort the structures significantly. If it distorts the structures by 25% in any cell, that is not acceptable. That's saying there's something that needs to be done in the manual stage. If it distorts a cell by 2-3%, that may, with the monetary threshold, that may well be acceptable. So I think that's the type of approach I would steer. But to Greg and Achille, on your models, what sort of tolerances are you prepared to tolerate?
So the tool doesn't prescribe anything. Basically, just basically with the tool you could balance anything if it's mathematically possible. So we don't have in the tool at the moment anything preventing you from balancing any percentage or any monetary value. It can be a huge imbalance that you would solve mechanically. So that's not what we recommend, but at the moment there's no prescription. My experience when we provide technical assistance is some countries, they set a threshold which is a percentage of the total supply by product. So they say, as you said, Sanjeev. Others have a monetary value, which sometimes makes sense because if you have an idea of the accuracy of your national accounts, you can say, based on the quality of the data that we collect, the source data, we think we have no confidence below, it depends on the size of the economy, but let's say $500,000 or 100,000. So okay. I've seen both approaches. Of course, if you use the monetary approach, depending on the product, it can mean more in terms of total imbalance for that product. So I think it also depends on the, I would say the focus. Sometimes it's not only a data quality issue. There may be some, if we're talking about countries with mineral resources, that may be strategically important for them. Yeah. To have accurate data, so they would spend more time on specific products which are strategically or for policy makers more important. So they would spend more time. So it means they would lower the threshold. So we don't have a simple answer. I think it's based on the case by case, but the tool itself doesn't prescribe anything.
Okay, thanks for that, Greg. I think we've filled the slot quite nicely. We've covered the different approaches. So thanks for the questions. Thanks to Greg and Achille. I will now hand over to Gerard.
Okay. Can I add something, Sanjeev? Sorry, Gerard.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Achille.
Yeah. Although the question does not apply to the IO converter, because a strong assumption is that to start converting the SUT into the IOTs, the SUT should be balanced. But my take on this question is that there are two kind of discrepancy in the system. So the first one is between the supply and the uses. This is the most important one that should be addressed first, because I mean it has a strong impact on the growth rate and on the GDP growth rate and the GDP deflator. And then the other one is what I would call at the product level. So basically, I think the countries or the compiler should first of all start by addressing the first in terms of total before moving to the product. Thank you.
Okay.
This
thank
was
you.
not discussed during this workshop, but I think is something to dive inside. Thank you.
Thanks, Akili. So over to you, Gerard.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you very much for Sanjay for moderating this part of the discussion as a follow-up of yesterday's discussion. So I will now take over the chair as well as the moderating of the next session. And that next session will be on the new